Folks usually don't purposely or decidedly walk into making themselves smaller. It's something that typically happens gradually, over the course of time, in small adjustments, in small hesitations and decisions that all seem reasonable when you're making them. Those times where you don't say anything because you don't want to make things uncomfortable, or where you tamp down on your excitement because it feels like it's just too much for the room, and you hold back on your opinion because you already sense how it might land. And everything while you're doing it feels small, and it feels understanding and maybe even considerate at times. So you do it, and then you do it again. And then before you know it, you are measuring yourself before you even enter rooms. There's been this shift within yourself where it's like a step down version of yourself over time. You filter your thoughts before they fully form. You become more aware of how you're perceived than how you're actually feeling. And from the outside, nothing looks wrong, because you're still present and you're still engaged, and you're still participating. But internally, you're operating in a fraction of what you actually are. And that's because you've been chipping away at who you are in order not to be seen or heard or to offend. And often this doesn't come from one singular experience. It builds over time. Those moments where you were misunderstood, or where your energy might have felt unwelcome, where your honesty created tension, or where your enthusiasm was met with silence. And you see this. So you learn, you observe, and you adapt. And you do this not because you decided to become some dehydrated version of you, but because you learned that certain parts of you felt easier to manage when they were toned down. And adaptation is human. I know this. It is, after all, how we navigate different environments. But when adaptation becomes constant, it slowly leads down that road to self-erasure, where you begin to show more of the version of yourself that feels most acceptable, most manageable, most comfortable for everyone else, while the fuller version of you stays in the background, stays in the background, peeking through the shears, waiting for its turn to be seen, for its turn to be enjoyed, for its turn to be accepted. Because the full-on version of you isn't gone. It's just less visible. And over time, that distance, that pullback game, that begins to register. It really starts to click with you. You notice that subtle dissatisfaction in the sense that you're not fully present in your own life. Because there's a difference between being considerate and being diminished, between adjusting and disappearing. And sometimes the hardest part is recognizing when that line has been crossed. Because making yourself smaller often feels like kindness, like maturity, like being easy to be around. And those are good things until they come at the expense of your authenticity. Until you stop showing parts of yourself that deserve to exist openly. Until you begin to feel more comfortable being less than who you are. And then something happens. It's just a growing awareness, a subtle shift that you're holding back in places where you once felt free. You notice that pause before you speak, that instinct to downplay yourself, or that habit of shrinking your presence to match the room. And that awareness matters because you can't reclaim what you haven't noticed you set aside. And this isn't about becoming louder or more assertive or forcing yourself to be bigger than you naturally are. This is about alignment. It's about letting yourself exist as you actually are without constant adjustment. Allowing your thoughts to land as they are. Letting your enthusiasm exist without apology. It's about trusting that the right spaces, those spaces won't require you to shrink. And recognizing that when you consistently feel the need to make yourself smaller, that it may not be about you at all. It may be about the space that you're in. Some environments naturally invite expansions, and others subtly encourage contraction. Neither's always dramatic, but both are felt. And over time, you do begin to learn the difference. You will definitely notice in those spaces where you feel open and where you feel measured, where you feel fed and where you feel starved. In those places where you feel like yourself and where you feel like you're playing yourself. And that awareness does become your guide. Not demanding change in the immediate, but helping you see, helping you recognize where you are most fully you. And also make you recognize where you've been gradually becoming smaller. Because you don't have to force yourself to be bigger. Sometimes the shift is in not shrinking and allowing yourself to be just that, yourself. Sit with yourself there and continue traveling.